I'm still at the stage of saying, subs, please check, actually. So that was great. Better audience than I had the last time I spoke in Hull, 2 years ago at the Central Library, as part of the Humber Mouth Literary Festival. I was billed to appear, talk about my career and my job, and like similar to what I'm doing now, and went into the room. There were smaller than this, but 60 or 70 chairs laid out, teacups and orange juice and all the rest of it. About 15 minutes after I was due to start, it became clear there was nobody going to come at all. Audience, zero. Apart from Judy, who's the librarian, and my mum and dad, who'd given me a lift to the talk. Me sat in the back of the car feeling about 14 years old. And it was pretty apparent that Judy and my dad wanted to leave it there. It was a lovely summer's evening. There was Wimbledon and Glastonbury on the telly, so that's what I was up against. My dad yawning, obviously wanted to go and watch tennis. Judy looking to pack up. But my mum, being my mum, insisted that we go ahead. And so for about an hour and a half, I had the surreal experience of being quizzed by my mum about my job. And it sort of broadened out into my life generally in the Central Library with my dad and this Judy person trying to leave. So that was my last speech, and I wrote a column about this on the Saturday one, and I got talking about trolling. This was this old-fashioned hate mail. Got a letter, not even an email, a letter with an address on, which is how I knew it came from Hull, and it started, and this is an absolute masterpiece of brevity and clarity in terms of an intro. It just said, "Piss off, Puff." Full stop. So, I mean, as the writing part of me was full of admiration. I mean, that's superb style. Colleague of mine, Danny Finkelstein, who you may have read in the Times, and you might have seen him on the TV as well. He's on Newsnight quite a lot. He once did a similar thing, he was invited to talk to some sort of political group, I think, in Norwich, and he also got nobody, grand attendance of none. And then he got a letter afterwards, and it said, "Dear Mr. Finkelstein," he's now Lord Finkelstein, he was then Mr. Finkelstein, "I would love to have come to your talk, but I'm sorry I couldn't come because it would have violated the terms of my parole." Which is... could I possibly get a bottle of water or something? Is that... Thank you, please. So, I went to school here. Are you from Hull, or are you people who've come from elsewhere to come to this course in Hull? But you might... Right. So I went to Wolferton School, which is about 5 miles that way, which in Hull obviously is considered posh, but in London they think, my dad must have been a docker, rather than... keep telling him he was a college lecturer, but down south, that is everyone, up here must have be a coal miner or a docker. Anyway, I went to the school reunion. My speech is... I'm going more down the kind of entertainment rather than the information route, because it's the end of a long day, and I'm hoping that that's going to sit well with you. I'll talk a bit about my job in a minute. But I went to this reunion, and I was talking to this guy outside, and he asked me what I did, and I said I worked for the Times. He didn't believe me, and then I persuaded him that that was true, and then he didn't believe that I could have gone to that school, given that I had the job that I had. And I said, "Mate, what is more likely, that I did go to that school, or that I've come 200 miles and I'm to pretend that I did?" It was very strange. And I said, "Well, anyway, what have you been doing?" And he said, "I've been a bit up and down." I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I worked at Halfords off the Clive Sullivan." I said, "Well, that sounds fine." He said, "Yeah, but before that I did 7 years in Armley for armed robbery." So it was a mixed school, and I just give that as a bit of context. So I do this column for the Times. I worked on the Times 22 years. I'm moving into my 23rd year. I started there in 1991 as a 27-year-old. I'd worked prior to that briefly for the New Statesman, The Guardian, the Sunday Correspondent, which was probably defunct before most of you were born, and the European, which is ditto. One lamented and one not so lamented late newspapers. But most of my career has been on the Times, and most of it, thanks ever so much, cheers. Most of it has been at the features and interviewing and column writing end of things rather than the newsroom end of things, although nowadays there's so few of us, we all have to do a bit of everything. So I'll talk more about that, really. I now do the Saturday column, and I do a column in Times 2 on a Tuesday, which is sort of newsier and more off the news, more kind of, not exactly current affairs, but more, not me and my family, but more what's going on in the world. I spend one day a week writing leaders, which are the unsigned editorial view of the paper. That's a sort of serious bit of my job, and I do reviews and features and quite a lot, although fewer and fewer, celebrity interviews. Partly for a lot of the reasons that David was talking about. The celebrity interview is slightly in decline, in newspapers at least. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Whenever I do these talks, one thing I've learned is that you think that people want a sort of future of the industry, talking about the writing process, a journalistic ethics talk, and what they really want is gossip about celebrities that you've met. So I do a little bit of that. I learned that lesson finally when I was asked to do a sermon in a church in Cheshire by a kind of forward-thinking vicar. And I gave my talk, quite a serious one, obviously, because it was a church. And at the end there was a sort of stunned silence, and then the voice from the back said, "When you met Jerry Hall, did you fancy her? Because I never have, really." It's a church, in a church. Yeah, I was amazed, and so, but that taught me that people like that end of things rather than perhaps the more serious stuff. I mean, my career, I've seen the whole celebrity thing in my career explode and then I think slightly begin to decline a little bit. I remember going back 1994, 20 years ago, on the Times magazine, Times Saturday magazine, and I mentioned to the editor, and this is a feature celebrity end of the Times, that there was a footballer called Eric Cantona who had played for Leeds and had just recently gone to Man United, and he seemed quite interesting, and maybe we should interview him. And I was told Times doesn't interview footballers. I mean, they did on the sports pages, but they would not have seen then, the people running the show, the appeal of a big set-piece celebrity interview with a footballer. And now, of course, we, like anybody, would kill for a Wayne Rooney interview, for instance. Although we wouldn't pay for one, which is why we haven't got very many Wayne Rooney interviews. Because increasingly, sportsmen, footballers in particular, which is slightly inverse, I mean, it doesn't really, with logic, it doesn't really work, given that they're paid so much, want paying. And a surprising number of our competitors, not necessarily, well, other newspapers and certainly magazines, do precisely that. The other thing that people want increasingly, and which is one of the reasons that I'm kind of getting out of the celebrity interviewing business, is that they want something called copy approval, which you'll no doubt all have been, told about. That is that they have sight of your copy before it's published and a potential veto over it. And again, a surprising number of our competitors, and certainly magazines and celebrity magazines, do precisely that. So, in our case, I think what's happening in our end of the market, certainly, is that we've slightly moved away from, celebrities have slightly overreached themselves, with us at least, and this led to us making a discovery, really, was that we thought that readers were interested in celebrities, pure and simple. Well, it turns out that readers, people, are interested in other people. Yeah? And if they're famous, so much the better. But if it's a choice between a famous person not saying very much, just using you essentially as a brand as part of their marketing operation, and a person who isn't famous but has got something honest and interesting and humorous and moving to say, readers will go for the second one. And so increasingly I found myself writing about myself. Yeah? I'm not remotely famous, but I can be given something interesting to do. You know, try and spend a week living without new technology. Yeah? Try and spend a week where you don't drink. It's a difficult one. You know, talk about a diet, talk about depression, talk about this, that, and the other. And you find that the response that I get to that is, in terms of feedback, is enormously more than if I just go and sit in a hotel room and interview an actor who doesn't say very much. Yeah? So we're kind of going down that route more. Also because, as per David was saying, we've lost our monopoly on the celebrity marketing industry doesn't need us in the way that it used to, because it can talk to its their fans directly through Twitter without us intervening. I mean, and the same with we used to have a monopoly on photography. But somebody told me the other day that there are more photographs taken each week now than there were in the entire history of film. Yeah, and that's what we're up against in terms of something that we used to be able to control: photographs of famous people or photographs of news events, and which we just simply don't control anymore. And the quality's so good as well. I also read that the Australian Open tennis a couple of tournaments ago, one picture agency gave all its photographers, told its photographers to put aside the Nikon and the Canons and to just use their mobile, take pictures. And of tennis, which is, I mean, I assume a really difficult thing to photograph, and nobody noticed the difference. Yeah? So we're up against professional quality technology. So, but I'm pleased with that because it means that I get to do probably more interesting things again, the sort of things that I probably went into journalism to do, but then got sidetracked into 20 years of talking to famous people, some of whom, you know, on a good day, you get a fantastic interview. Alex Ferguson, I interviewed him at his house. We got on. He was weirdly charming and friendly, which is hard for some of us to believe, but on that day he was. And I got a great interview out of it, and that was great. But for every one of those, there were 10 where it was all a little bit more forced, and people were possibly for good reason, because some of my colleagues in News of the World, notably, obviously went far too far. But people were suspicious and anxious about you as a journalist, just in the way that David said that we've got that. I mean, that predated hacking and Leveson. I mean, a lot of people have been like that. As I say, sometimes with good reason for a long time. I mean, I could tell sort of. I don't know which way to go with this. So maybe can we do sort of Q&A rather than me just? I could stand here and tell stories about celebrities, but I don't know quite what people want. So maybe can we just? Okay, Ferguson. Ferguson was the best and worst moment in my journalistic career. It was the best moment because I did a good interview and I got a prize for it. It was the worst because halfway through we were talking about the importance of him not just being a domineering character, but also being a good listener and responding to his players as individuals. And I said to him, so you're in touch with your feminine side, Sir Alex? Yeah? And this was a man of a certain age. This is obviously not a phrase with which he was remotely familiar. He didn't know what I was talking about, although he had his suspicions. And his face, he started to, face just started to go red, like in a cartoon from the bottom up. And his son, Jason, was there, who acted as his agent. And his son, Jason, turned to me and said, my father thinks you're asking him if he's bisexual. And weird and wonderful world, but I think we can probably all agree that's not likely. And so I had to, that was a shockingly worrying moment. We got back on track soon after that. Then there was another bad moment. We went out into the garden to do the pictures. He had a little toy football net there for his grandchildren. The photographer wanted to get him standing in front of the goal. And the photographer asked me, because he wanted some movement in the picture, he asked me to kick a football from over there, between the lens and Ferguson. I was never very good at football. I sliced it horribly, straight into Ferguson's unprotected groin. He was standing there with his hands in his pockets, couldn't do a thing about it. And I'd admired his, he went all sort of Glaswegian and just sort of flinched slightly and absorbed the blow. Fame, there's a weird thing about fame. It corrupts people, even when just the fact of having it. It doesn't corrupt, and it's too strong a word. Jamie Oliver, right? I've interviewed Jamie Oliver twice. Once when he was just on the absolute cusp of becoming properly famous, when he was on Channel 4 and just building, and it was lovely. He was really, really agreeable. Just sort of what you saw was what you got. He was a young man on the rise and enjoying himself, cheeky chappy. I interviewed him again about 3 years later, by which time he'd become properly famous and was trying to crack America. He was flying over once a month to New York to appear on the Letterman show or the Tonight Show, whatever it's called, to try and build up an audience in America. And I went with him on about his 5th visit, or rather not with him. I came a couple of days later, and I said, well, how was your flight, Jamie? And he started moaning because apparently on Virgin First Class, I didn't know this because we don't get sent first class, but he did, you get a massage. Huh? And for some reason, some bureaucratic cock-up, he hadn't had his massage, yeah? Having had it for previous flights. And he was moaning about it a bit. And it made him sound like a complete tosser, basically. But that's fame and wealth. That's what it does to you. Because you can imagine a situation, if you're honest with yourself, where if you'd had 4 massages in a row and you didn't get your 5th, you start to feel, where's my massage? Yeah? And that's what happens even to a nice guy like Jamie Oliver. Yeah? And he still is a nice guy. I've just remembered this is being streamed live, isn't it? Yeah. He still is a lovely guy. And I'm sure he's got over that moment of having to sort of slightly deal with the consequences of fame. Rod Stewart in Beverly Hills. You can imagine Rod Stewart lives in some splendour in Beverly Hills. He does, and I turned up at his gated mansion compound, booby-doo, to interview him. And it's a nice place, Rod. And he started moaning because he'd got a pool and he'd got a tennis court. He'd got a recording studio and a tennis court, but there hadn't been quite enough room to fit in a pool. Rod Stewart does not have a swimming pool. Right? And Eddie Van Halen, maybe a bit, I see you'll clock that name, sold a lot of records in America in the 80s. Didn't really make it here, but massive in America. Sold rather more records than Rod Stewart did. Had a big enough plot to get all 3 in. And Rod spent a good chunk of the interview whining. Whining about that. Jim Davidson, down in Surrey. Lovely house in Surrey. Oliver Reed's former house. A Bentley and a Jag, or Bentley and a something in the drive. I was making conversation. Oh, lovely cars, Jim. Yeah, but the guy down the road's got 6 Ferraris. I said, who's he? He said, Eric Clapton. Some people never satisfied, yeah? Ask me some questions and I'll give you some more of this stuff if that's of any interest. Or if you want to ask me sensible questions about being a journalist, then feel free to do that too. Do my best. Anyone at all? Second? Proper celebrity, yeah? Oh, I suppose just more famous than he was, you know. I mean, I didn't mean it. There was no sort of value judgment. Just if you're on Channel 4 once a week, and 1 million people are watching your show, you're not as big of a celebrity as you are when your cookbooks, best-selling book, a non-fiction book, in at Christmas every year. That's all I meant.
So, we have so many minor celebrities that reality TV stuff.
Yeah.
They're not real celebrities, they're kind of experienced people that characters and social challenges.
Yeah.
But it's not real celebrity anymore. But so are we losing real celebrity, or is it changing?
I think we all know a real celebrity when we see one. I think there's a profusion of largely to do with reality TV and it's sort of an unholy alliance that it has with tabloids, where these people are, being created. I mean, I thought that was something to do with age. Maybe it's not though, because if you're saying that, I mean, I look at the Mail Online sidebar of shame, yeah, and this is another reason why it's good for me to be getting out of the business of interviewing famous people, because I look down there and I just don't recognise. This is a blonde in a bikini. But I don't know who these people are, and they're being touted as if they are mega famous, and maybe they are to people your age. But yes, there's certainly a profusion, because it expands to fill the space available. I mean, we used to have 3 television channels, and now we've got hundreds. Yeah. So somebody's got to be on them, and if the very fact of being on telly means that a newspaper editor then deems you famous and worthy of coverage, then, albeit for not very long, you are famous, I suppose. If you're on telly and the paper editor thinks he can flog a few copies on the back of that while you're on the X Factor for 6 months, but it's fleecing, isn't it? Yeah. But we would still know a big star when we see one, because it's somebody of substance who's achieved. Not in all cases, but generally they've achieved something, or they've got some quality that we respond to. Charm or whatever. Charisma. Yeah. Is that telly still yeah. Might need a bit of legal advice here. There's a couple of people who are married men, politicians, who have a certain reputation, an open secret within my world, of being less than faithful to their wives. Yeah? One in particular comes to mind. I shouldn't mention his name. I didn't want to ask him the question, but I had to. Yeah? There's always... I took him out for a sort of manly... because his wife was there as well, so I took him out for a sort of manly walk in the car. I basically said, "You cheat on your wife?" And he went, "No." Non-surprisingly. He then wrote a book. I think he was saving it. He then wrote a book, his autobiography, not long later, in which he admitted various affairs. So he wasn't going to throw that away and give that to me, because that's got a commercial value to him. Yeah, I mean, there's all... It's asking people about their private, what I consider to be their private lives, is awkward. But there's a fiction with these things, which most people know how to play the game, that you're there to talk about the movie, yeah? Or the record or the book. But really you're there to talk about their private life as much as possible. And there's a sort of ritual little dance around it. And I would try to strike a balance between, and I'd probably get the balance not quite right, because other more fearless interviewers than me would ask questions that I probably wouldn't quite have the gumption to ask. But I go a certain way down that road, and there are certain people that if you interview them, there is a big question that you have to ask them. Yeah? And depending on... If they're young and impressionable and optimistic, you'll probably get an answer. And if they're older, towards the end of their careers, Rod Stewart, Alex Ferguson, whoever, they don't really care anymore. Yeah? They're self-confident, their image is made, their fortune is made, you'll also get an answer. But if they're somewhere in the sort of 30 years between those 2 points, and they're trying to manage an image, you won't necessarily get an answer, or you get a lie. But yeah, there's generally always an awkward question. Yeah, and hopefully most times I would have asked it, but probably not as... Looking back, I wish I'd asked it more often, whatever the question was. And proper, I consider myself a good writer and a not bad interviewer, yeah? There are some people who are much better interviewers than I am, and they ask the question. Yeah.
You mentioned you found it quite difficult to sort of ask some questions. So would you say that the industry is quite competitive? Like if you wanted to be a journalist, you sort of focus more on interviews. Would you say it's quite competitive industry?
It's a competitive industry, I'd make the tabloid. It's much more competitive in a sense of ruthless competition between the titles. Yeah. In the broadsheet end of things, it's a bit more middle class and gentlemanly, I suppose. Yeah. Although maybe that's not entirely true anymore. Yeah, of course you're competing. This is a job that a lot of people want to have. So yes, of course you're competing with other people. There's more people want to do it than our jobs available. Yeah? So there's competitive. But, it's not cutthroat. It's not, if you're good enough, there's jobs to go around, and it's, in different ways, the media taken as a whole is doing fine. And it's, as people have told stories to each other ever since they sat around a campfire, yeah? And the medium is really not... We've had 250 years of print, had a really good run, and now it's going electronic, in maybe not entirely electronic in my career, but I guess entirely electronic, I would say, probably in your careers. Maybe. Or print will certainly be more specialist, it'll be more niche, it'll probably cost more, lower circulations, higher price, I suspect. Yeah? But it still will always be there. So if you really want to do it, you can do it. Yeah? But you've got to have that curiosity about other people. You've got to be nosy. It's like, it's just what David said. Your job is to ask questions, whether that's an investigative reporter trying to crack, a child sex ring, or whether it's trying to find out who some Hollywood actor is sleeping with. It's all about just being nosy. One might have certain more social value than the other, yeah, in terms of the greater good of society. But it's the same skill. It's the same sort of skill set, really. Sorry. Just writing that column every Saturday for 12 and a half years. I've written 600 of those beta mail columns and making them work. Because it's not really about anything, is it? I don't know if you read it, but you're trying to make entertainment out of everyday life. And you're trying to universalise your own experience and hoping that this is going to strike a chord with a reader and entertain people. And doing that week after week, especially when really nothing much has happened. You don't really have anything to write about. If you're writing a news story, you've got something to write about. If you're writing an interview, you've got quotes. Or hopefully you've got some quotes, or you've got something to work off. But that 900-word column, essentially just conjuring it up out of your own head and trying to make it good, that's quite difficult week after week. And trying to make it look as if it isn't difficult, Trying to make it look as if you just dashed it off. That's where you sort of earn your money. Yeah. One, because I did really against the grain. I wrote a piece of investigative journalism, which is the kind of thing I think probably when we're growing up and you're at school and you're good at English and you like to be a journalist, you're not really thinking of being a showbiz reporter or a celebrity interviewer, or you might be thinking of being a sports reporter or maybe a war correspondent. But a lot of us are probably thinking, I'm going to do this because I want to, right or wrong, yeah? And I kind of, in a small way, helped to do that. I wrote a piece about a guy who'd been who was in prison for murder in South Wales of his girlfriend's parents. And it was South Wales Police at that time, I don't know about now, but at that time they weren't in a good place. And there were an awful lot of these cases in South Wales. And it was pretty obvious once you started looking into it that the case against this guy was very, very flimsy. And I spent a long time really getting into the details of it and wrote a very long piece in the Times magazine, 6,000 words, about it. And not as a direct consequence of that, but I think that article did play a part in it going to appeal, and a successful appeal, and he was released. He was clearly innocent. I mean, it was just utterly botched, the whole thing. So, and I hope it wouldn't. I don't think it'd be arrogant for me to say that I had a small role in that guy not being in prison anymore. So that, because the rest of it, most of what I do is about entertainment rather than about information or campaigning. And I don't make any apology for being at that end of things. It's good to entertain people. But that was I could think back and think, that was a sort of something that you can sort of chalk up and think, well, yeah, well done. And then I just wasted the last 20 years after that, really. Hello. Yeah. Yeah. No. Not even a little bit free. No, that's the view of the paper. You are there just as you are a cipher. In my column, putting the Saturday one at the side, in the Tuesday one, I am, obviously there's parameters which within you which you work, but nobody is censoring me there or telling me what to write or what not to write. But a leader is, you're not really a columnist, or your name's not on it. You are just there expressing what is sometimes the collective, generally speaking, the collective view of the paper, and sometimes it's the collective view of one man, the guy in charge. By whom I mean the editor, not Rupert Murdoch. Yeah. But generally, we have a leader conference. The leader writers all. There's a news conference. The chief leader writer goes to news conference. He comes out. He gathers the leader writers of the day around him. Says, well, this is what is going in the paper. This is what looks like suitable material for a leader. We talk about it. We then go into a meeting with the editor, the deputy editor, the foreign editor, and the associate editor, the number 3 kind of person. And we talk about it, and then the editor decides, but on the basis of what's been presented to him. He doesn't say. He would take account of what the other people think the topic should be, and what the content of those leaders should be, if we do them. But it's his decision, and then you go away and write it. But you are expressing the view of the meeting rather than. But having said that, I've written over 100 now, and I've only written one which I actually personally disagreed with. Yeah, which was about gun control in America, where we're very reluctant to tell the Americans what to do about guns, because it's seen as sort of. We're quite happy to tell other countries how to act, but we don't like telling the Americans what to do about guns. And it seems obvious to me that lots of people get killed in America because there are too many guns around, yeah? And I didn't quite write that. I didn't write everyone should be free to buy a Kalashnikov, but I didn't quite write what I actually personally thought. The rest of the time I have. Huh. You ready to go? He's starting to clap. Really nice. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah. Best thing that ever said about writing was said by Stephen King, who's a very underrated writer, largely because he sells so many books, yeah? So he doesn't have critical acclaim, although he has enormous popular acclaim. He said, to write anything, you have to be inspired, and I arrange to be inspired when I sit down at my desk every day at 9 o'clock. Yeah? So, writer's block, bit of a myth, I think. It's for, maybe if you're writing a novel and you've got all year to do it, you can have a bit of writer's block. But in this game, as David would tell you, news editors are horrific, monstrous people. You have to get it, and as our features editors, as our, they say, it's saying in journalism, I want it good, and I want it by 4 o'clock. But mostly I want it by 4 o'clock. Yeah? So you just do it. And it's great. There's so much mystique about writing. You've got to have the right office, you've got to have the right pen, you've got to be this, J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter in a noisy cafe in the middle of Edinburgh. I mean, you could say that showed in the writing, but you take my point, yeah? So a lot of journalism isn't actually about writing at all, really. It's about information gathering, and the writing is the smallest part of it. That's something you do in half an hour at the end of the day. Mine is more about mine, and feature stuff is more about the writing, but it's still, you haven't got much time, and you haven't got the luxury of thinking, "Ooh, I can't do this." You've got to do it. Huh? Or there's blank space in the paper. They start having to put house ads in and stuff. No, can't happen. We're done.